they certainly all did not live happily ever after. What we've got is a myth that encapsulates ancient astronomy. It's an apocalyptic tale with overtones of agri-Armageddon. In history, swords were drawn most often where wheat lapped against people's knees most abundantly. And nowhere was that the case more so than in Caithness in the northeast coast of Scotland. And it was on the tide line between the Norse and Celtic cultures that this myth unfolded between the 8th and the 9th centuries. On the Hill of Ulrich in the north of Caithness, just about 4 miles south of Castletown, a hillock rises in the flat agricultural farmlands known as Sysa. And the Sysa mound was always associated with fairy queens and supernatural Celtic creatures. So at this location, the Sysa mound, where I actually lived on 2 occasions, on one occasion on the north side of Ulrich Hill, on Ulrich Farmhouse, and then on the other side at Waydale, 200 metres from what's known as the Sysa mound. Now, I'm going to begin the myth of the Piper of Windy Ha. A long time ago existed a normal farm boy known as Peter Waters. Now, Peter Waters lived in Windy Ha, a cottage on the top of the Hill of Ulrich. And one morning, Peter set off droving cattle southwards and came upon the Sysa hillock around midday. Peter leaned in to the crystal clear waters of the holy well, the Sysa well, and he sipped of the waters and felt drowsy, and Peter fell asleep. Now Peter woke up just before sunset when he felt somebody pushing his shoulder. And when he awoke, he looked into the iceberg blue eyes of a blonde woman with golden ringlets and a green dress emblazoned with silver keys. Peter was staring into the eyes of the Faerie Queen. Now Peter, feeling the touch of the Faerie Queen, thought she was making advances on him, and the myth recalls that he said, "Surely one must court with his woman before stepping into the silken veil." The Faerie Queen laughed and backed off. But of course, at this time, to him, to Peter, the Faerie Queen was just a fair maiden. And she said, "I am here to help lift you in life. I'm going to give you 2 offers. You must pick of one." The Faerie Queen produced a golden book with an emerald-encrusted golden clasp. It was a Bible, and gave Peter the offer of becoming the greatest spiritual leader in the north coast of Scotland. He would amass a following and go down in history for his non-material religious works. And on the other hand, the maiden presented Peter with a set of green silken pipes, emblazoned again with silver golden keys. Peter saw in the pipes the opportunity to be the most famous musician in the north coast of Scotland. He saw riches, he saw booze and after parties, and he saw material wealth. Peter turned to the maiden and said, "I want to choose the pipes, but I have a problem. Music I have never known." So the fairy told him that when required, the pipes would provide the music he needed. Or before he left the well, the maiden had said, "With your pipes, I give to thee is one contract. I need you to return 7 years after this date to the evening. You must return to the well after 7 years." So Peter bade his farewell to the maiden and made his way back over the hill from the Sysa mound to Windy Ha. So Peter walked in and put his pipes on the table, and his mum and dad, who were sitting in the farmhouse, were shocked. They asked Peter, "Where on earth did you get such tools?" Now, Peter explained he met this beautiful fair maiden beside the well, and immediately the parents told him, "Get these pipes out of this house." Of course they were an offering or a giving from the fairy queen herself. Enchanted pipes were part of Celtic folklore. Everybody knew of the works of the mysterious fairy queen. But Peter instead grabbed his pipes and he started tootling away. And it was as if some kind of fairy dust spread throughout Windy Half farmhouse because his mum and dad starting like there was no tomorrow. They were dancing. They were bouncing up the walls. And after a few minutes, his grandmother, who was said to be 18 on 2 sticks, started parading around as if she was on pills. The farmhouse was bouncing and Peter stopped instantly. And so there did the dancing. His mum and dad sweating on the floor. The granny in a catastrophic calamity of sticks, crumpled, exhausted, all knew that they had been enchanted by the spells and the music of the fairy queen. But Peter refused to accept this and claimed only that he had been given a gift by his new friend, the maiden of the Sysa well. So Peter bounced around the north of Scotland with his pipes, thinking about his 7-year contract, amassing a fortune, playing as far south as the borders, the enchanted pipes of the fairy queen. He became renowned as one of the most accomplished and magical pipers in Scotland. Peter the Piper of Windy Ha. But as if but a day had passed, 7 years came to a close. And Peter woke up that morning and sensed something unnatural in the air. The day felt long, and the sunset approached. And Peter the Piper, with pipes under arm, made his way up Ulrich Hill, his dog at side. And when he got to the top, Peter told his dog to go home. And the dog, with a slouched head, watched Peter as he made his way towards the Sysa mound, to what's been recorded as being in a state of glowing phosphorescence and a greenish hue. The dog yelled and screamed as Peter walked and became a silhouette towards the Sysa mound. Peter was never seen again. Now that is how the Piper of Windy Ha closes. Peter was never seen again. So, to tackle this myth, what does the myth of Peter the Piper mean? Well, in a basic and psychological interpretation, it tells the story of the ego of youth, knowing better than the advice of one's parents. It tells of the desire for the hero's journey to find oneself and to break the molds and constraints of one's upbringing, than to take the advice of one's elders. It also tells the story of all of our decisions in life to choose material or non-material paths. Peter chose the life of fame and riches and drunkenness over the spiritual path, the path of the churchman. The 7-year contract that Peter held with the fairy queen. In some of Scotland's most famous myths, from the borders all the way up to the north coast of Scotland, the 7-year contract is repeated. For example, in the border myth of Tam Lin, he was abducted also by the fairy queen and held in a fairy mound for 7 years. McAllister, in the wonderful 70s book, The Haunted Mountain, was again seduced by the grey man of the mountain and entrapped, bounded in fairyland for 7 years. So, where do you begin to interpret what the 7 might stand for in fairy lore? A central component of fairy lore was the fairy star, which is a 7-pointed septagram. The 7-pointed septagram was said by early mythologists to represent the 7 dimensions of reality, but more based in out of the psychological realm into the astronomical realm. The 7 stars represented the 7 Sisters constellation, the Pleiades cluster, which came over the horizon about March when seeds were being planted at the start of the farming season. So if the contract of 7 years in the Windy Ha myth, in the Piper of Windy Ha, he was under an obligation to return to the same spot after 7 years, is astronomical primarily. So then too might be Peter. so too might be the Faerie Queen. And that's exactly what the article that this talk is based on comes to a conclusion about. What I observed is that if you transplant the name Peter in the myth for the word sun, the myth reads exactly the same. Listen to this. This is getting cool now. The sun rose early one day. Peter left his house. It slowed down and stopped at midday. The sun in the sky at its meridian. It then got a rub on the shoulder by the Faerie Queen. The sun was going to set, and the moon competed for its light in the sky. The Faerie Queen is the moon. Peter is the sun. The middle of June was the date that the myth was set. So if Peter represented this summer solstice sun at its brightest time in the sky, being challenged by the night of the moon, the myth can be interpreted wholly as representing the annual cycle of the sun. What I did was I took this interpretation I come up with, that we've got a solar lunar system within the Piper of Windygha myth. I did a very, very simple cartographical exercise which had enormous results with really cool implications for mythologists and folklorists around the world. Because if what I've discovered can be repeated in other locations with other myths, then we're looking at bringing what's today interpreted as legend, myth, and things of the mind hard and firmly into the real world. For I plotted Sysa Mound on a map and plotted Windygha only a few kilometers away at the top of the hill of Ulrich. That alignment from Windygha to Ulrich Hill is precisely 38 degrees. Now, it can be no coincidence that the summer solstice sun rises in Caithness behind Windygha when viewed from Sysa at 38 degrees. This is an absolutely beautiful example of ancient astronomical principles and values being embedded and passed on through a Celtic myth system that's existed for over 1,200 years, appeared in Calder's History of Caithness. What we've got is a myth that encapsulates ancient astronomy. So that beckons the question, why is this myth associated to where this alignment occurs between Windygha, an ancient farming settlement, and the Sysa Mound, the mound of the fairies, the entry portal to the Queen of the Fairies? Well, this is why I think this is going on. The Sysa Mound, it's a Neolithic mound like all of the others in Caithness, a burial cairn. It was a centre for solar worship since 4000 BC, 6,000 years ago. Solar priests standing amidst these fertile, wheat-laden fields of Caithness would have seen the rising sun above where Windygha is located today as the most important astronomical occurrence in the year. Now, this brings us right back to the source and essence of the Piper of Windygha and why I said it had apocalyptic undertones. In an agricultural outdoor society, where the return of the sun was everything, life and death, we didn't have these things and apps. We depended on the return of the sun every day and the beginning of a new solar cycle on the 22nd of June every year. Peter, the sun, entering the mound of the moon, the fairy princess's portal, and never being seen again, is representative of the summer solstice sun setting and not rising the next day. It's an apocalyptic tale with overtones of agri-Armageddon. It's talking of poisoned harvests. The myth of the Piper of Windygha has in its root system the knowledge of past cultures' struggles to survive in the sometimes treacherous landscape and open environments of Caithness. So we have the ego of youth transcending the advice of parents and choosing a material path over the spiritual. We have the 7 years of the contract between Peter and the Faerie Queen as a reference to the 7 observable planets and the weeks and possibly the Pleiades, 7 sisters, constellation that appears at the beginning of the farming season. If Peter is indeed the sun, and he was challenged by the moon on the evening of the summer solstice and never returned the next day, but here we see a story where they certainly all did not live happily ever after. But that's what I love in this myth. This here has a dark overtone and a real reminder of the struggles of ancient Caithnesians and Scottish cultures in general, where 9 times out of 10, the features and the creatures and the characters of myths can be related to the environment. But nowhere European myths can we actually draw an alignment that pulls the solar astronomy of a location directly into the heart and soul of the myth, and vice versa, where a myth can be lifted out of the realms of psychology into the hard world and measurable with modern day tools. And on that note, you need me to stop talking now, but thank you so much for tuning in. We've found hardcore archaeology lost in the Andean highlands of Colombia. We discovered this. Look at the archaeology. It's just incredible. Oh, it's dangerous.
What you guys may have discovered may rewrite so many things.
Look at this. Oh, look at the artwork.